I received these pine boards from a cousin who wanted to build a display cabinet for his collection of photography equipment. He provided me with the measurements and design he desires. These two boards will be the top and bottom of the cabinet, so I am starting by cutting them with my table saw, and these are going to be its sides and dividers. My table saw's capacity prevents me from making all the cuts, so I use a circular saw and this homemade track to complete the cuts. I have to measure the cut, draw a straight line with a square, position the track on the line, clamp the track and begin cutting with the circular saw. This ensures a square and accurate cut. First I cut all the pieces the same width, then I redesigned the top piece to be wider than the others so it would stand out, and I could round the front edge. I believe this will improve the appearance of the furniture. These minor details will make it more attractive. I used a handsaw to flush cut the ends once the glue had dried. The pine boards have some knots in it. I used wood putty to fill in the majority of their gaps, and I chose to use a wood patch to hide this ugly one that would be on top. I marked the sides of the patch with a knife before cutting it and putting it on the knot. Then I used a router to cut out the majority of the knot, but I kept the router bit away from the knife marks so I could use a chisel to finish the cuts. This will ensure that the wood patching fits well and closes any gaps. I then glue the patch in the place, trim any excess with a flash cutting saw, and tape the surface to prevent scratches. This is the finished product after a little bit of sanding. Before I started working on the sides and dividers, I sanded the top and bottom of the cabinet. In order to cut the front edge of the sides and dividers in the shape of L, I clamped them all together. This is the cross cut. I also made a jig for the rib cut, but I was unable to complete the cut completely with the circular saw, so I used a handsaw. This is another detail I added to make it more attractive, as seen in this picture, so the doors will be flush with the sides and bottoms. Here I made a groove in the top for the back panel using a circular saw with the track. I made several cuts at it. Additionally, I made the same changes to the bottom so that, like in this photo, the back panel would rest on it and be flush with the top and the base. Here I am using a round bit on my router to round the front edges of the top. I considered a variety of edge profiles before deciding on round edges. Sometimes the easiest option is the best one. The joinery is the most crucial step in the creation of this kind of furniture, and I consider using mortise and tenon, sliding mortise, dowels or even dovetail. But in the end I decided to keep things simple and use screws and glue, with plugs to conceal the screws because I would be using stain for the finish, which would make all the plugs and patches invisible. I made more than enough plugs for this reason, and I'll keep them until I put the entire body together. I will use 3 long screws for each joint, and I pre-drilled the screws locations using this simple jig to make the glue up and joinery less stressful. I also used tape on my drill bit to stop the bit because these holes will be filled with the plugs. It's time for assembling, and I began by fastening the 2 sides together with the base. These corner clamps I made earlier are very useful for this assembly. They clamp the 2 pieces together and keep them square to each other. I glued the place and then clamped the side. I added these 2 long clamps after that. In order to prevent any splitting, I also pre-drilled the holes before fastening the screws. And this is the other side. I then used the same corner clamps to add the two dividers in the same manner as the sides, and before it dried I wiped off the extra glue. I am assembling the top here. I put glue on the sides and dividers first, then I put the top in place. To match the base one, I used this MDF board between the sides and dividers. Then in order to prevent sliding, I applied as many clamps as necessary. Then I screwed the top and removed all the clamps. Since I assembled everything at once, the top was more challenging than the base, but it turned out nicely. To be honest, I was stressed. Additionally, I used a towel to remove all the extra glue from the joineries. It's easier to do this now rather than later by sanding. In order to choose plugs that match the graininess, I made a lot of them. I used glue for them, then I used a flash cutting saw to cut off any excess. And I used this plain cut to prevent scratches. And I used chisel to flush them with the surface. I began assembling the shelves here, starting with the middle one. To make the shelves square and equal in space for each one, I clamped these two pieces of MDF. After hammering the middle shelf into position with some force, I clamped the shelf. I pre-drilled the screw hole and inserted the screws. Since I don't want the screws on the sides to be visible, I am creating pocket holes for the left and right shelves. For the space I used the same MDF pieces, and then I fastened the shelves with screws. I flipped the cabinet over after assembling all the shelves. This will be the front of the cabinet. I have put the entire cabinet together and I am now beginning to work on the doors. I had originally intended to make slab cabinet doors, but my cousin said he liked the Jacob cabinet door style after sending me a picture of one. I said okay. I am currently building the door sides and will put them together using dowels. I am creating the dowel holes here. I am marking the depth of the grooves here. Since this style requires grooves inside all sides, I made the grooves with 3 passes using my plunge router and this basic jig. Making this jig was really easy. All I had to do was screw 3 pieces together with the base to align all of the grooves. I am cutting the ends of this slab here so they fit into the grooves. In order to give it the appearance of a shaker cabinet door, I cut on one face and designed it so that the front of the panel will be almost 5 centimeters below the sides, while the back will be flush with the back of the sides. The middle panel and all the sides are now ready for assembly. I glued the dowels in place, then put the top and bottom in place, and now I am sliding the middle panel into the grooves without using glue because I left a small amount of space inside the grooves, which should allow for wood movements without affecting the joinery later. And I will use the dowel to glue the final piece to lock the middle panel. I used these long clamps to clamp them, then I left them for a day before unclamping them. To get rid of the pencil marks and extra glue on the surfaces, I am sanding them quickly. I had a problem before I installed the door hinges. I could only install these hinges on wood that was 1.8 centimeters thick. However, because this pine is 2.7 centimeters thick, I put the hinges on these 2 pieces to test their functionality. After a few tries, I discovered the hinges that fit these, and I rounded the edge to make the door open and close smoothly. After I was satisfied and confident with this piece, I began using a hand plane to round one edge. After that, I attached the hinges to the actual doors. In order to create even spaces when assembling the doors and front drawers, I always keep some playing cards in my workshop. Here I am using them to create space between the doors and the sides. After that, I screwed the door to the sides after positioning it and clamping it to keep it from moving while being installed. I also installed the other door. and I am testing them now to see how will they function. This leg was brought by my cousin, but it had two stamped pieces for installation. Since I didn't like them, I had to remove them first, which was difficult, and then I made a hole in the middle to install the threads. I installed them by epoxy. Then I tapped the thread and made sure they were straight. There were 5 legs altogether. To install the legs, I flipped the cabinet over, drilled the holes for the legs, rounded the tops of the holes, and inserted a thread insert into the holes. Here I am inserting the thread into the inserts to install the legs. To check how the cabinet stood on the legs, I then turned it over. Now that the entire cabinet is ready for finishing, I sanded it by hand using 220 grit sandpaper as the final grit. I always like to sand the final grit by hand, although it takes more time but gives much better results. I am using a dark stain that my cousin chose for the finish. I like the color and it adds beauty and elegance to the cabinet. I reduced the darkness by mixing the stain with a small amount of mineral spirit. To apply, simply wipe the surface with a clean cloth and immediately wipe off any excess. I started with the top, then the sides and doors, and finally I stained the inside as well. The back panel was made of 5 cm thick plywood, which I stained to match the color of the cabinet. Here you can see the advantage of creating the top and bottom grooves so the back panel will fit between them. I simply fastened the rear panel with screws. The final step is to install the door handles, which I did after pre-drilling the handles holes and screwed it into position. Because the stain looked too dry after drying and I was worried about scratches on the surfaces, I applied beeswax to the stain to make it look nicer and less likely to get scratched in the future. And this is the last result. I hope you like the video and subscribe my channel. Thank you for staying till the end.